Welcome back, travelers and dreamers, to our hearth in the quiet hours. The fire burns low, casting gentle shadows across the walls as we continue our journey through the lore of Elder Scrolls, Oblivion Remastered. I invite you once more to make yourself comfortable as we venture beyond the boundaries of Mehrunes, beyond the familiar skies of Tamriel, and into the infinite realms of Oblivion. In our previous gathering, we witnessed the fall of an empire and the sacrifice that saved all of creation. Tonight we turn our gaze to the realms that threaten to consume our world, the countless planes of Oblivion and the 16 Daedric Princes who rule them as gods in their own domains. These are realms of wonder and terror, of beauty and madness, each shaped by the will and nature of its prince. From the scorching Deadlands of Mehrunes Dagon to the endlessly shifting corridors of Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha, from the vibrant madness of the Shivering Isles to the decadent pleasures of Sanguine's realms, each plane is a universe unto itself, governed by laws beyond mortal comprehension. As the crackling flames provide their comforting rhythm, allow your mind to drift with me across the borders of reality. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the dancing firelight paint pictures behind your eyelids as we explore the manifold realities that exist alongside our own. Our journey begins with the very structure of the cosmos, with the spaces between spaces where the Daedra make their home. Chapter 1. The Cosmos of Elder Scrolls. To understand the Daedric Realms, we must first understand the structure of the cosmos itself, the layered realities that comprise existence in the world of the Elder Scrolls. Imagine, if you will, a great wheel. At its center lies Mundus, the mortal plane, encompassing Mehrunes and its moons, the mortal world, and its immediate celestial neighbors. This is the realm we know, the realm of limited lifespans, of physical laws that bind rather than bend, of mortality and its attendant burdens and joys. Mundus is finite, comprehensible, and constant in ways the outer realms are not. Surrounding Mundus, like the spokes of our imagined wheel, are the realms of Oblivion, countless planes, each a universe unto itself, existing simultaneously alongside our own. These innumerable realms range from the well-known domains of the Daedric Princes to countless minor planes, some no larger than a small room, others vast beyond mortal comprehension. There is no true count of how many planes of Oblivion exist, for they form and dissolve according to rules beyond mortal understanding. Beyond even Oblivion, encompassing the entire wheel, lies Aetherius, the immortal plane, the realm of magic and pure light. Aetherius is the source of all magicka that flows into Mehrunes, seeping through the stars like light through tiny holes in a vast curtain. It is from Aetherius that the Magna G, the star orphans, led by Magnus, the god of magic, fled when they refused to participate in the creation of Mundus. Their flight tore holes in the fabric of Oblivion, creating the stars through which magic pours into our world. This cosmic structure emerged from what scholars call the Dawn Era, when the very concept of reality was still taking shape. According to the most widespread creation myths, particularly those with Aldmeri origins, the universe began with two primordial forces, Anu, representing order and stasis, and Padome, embodying chaos and change. From their interplay emerged the Ataida, the original spirits, beings of immense power who would eventually become the gods, and Daedra, known throughout Tamriel's many cultures. It was Lorcan, one of these original spirits, who proposed the creation of Mundus, a realm where lesser beings could experience limitation, and through it achieve new forms of understanding. Some of the Atada, particularly Magnus, designed the architectural principles of this new reality. Others contributed portions of their own divine power to make the project possible. But as Mundus took shape, many of the Atada realized that participating in its creation required tremendous sacrifice. The plane drained their divine essence, limiting them in ways they had never before experienced. Some, like Magnus, fled immediately, tearing holes in the fabric of reality that became the sun and stars. Others remained, but withdrew much of their power, becoming the 8 divines, the Idra, or our ancestors in Aldmeri tongue, who are now worshipped across Tamriel. Their power became bound to Mundus, their essence woven into its very fabric. And then there were those who refused Lorkhan's invitation entirely, the Ateda, who held themselves apart from the creation of Mundus, preserving their full divine power and freedom. These beings became the Daedra, or not our ancestors, who established their own realms within the infinite possibilities of Oblivion. Unlike the Idra, whose power was diminished and bound to the laws of Mundus, the Daedra remained unfettered, capable of shaping entire universes according to their will. The Daedra are often characterized as inherently evil in imperial theology, but this is a simplification that fails to capture their true nature. The Daedra are beings of absolute, unchanging essence. Each embodies specific spheres of influence, specific concepts or forces, and acts in accordance with those fundamental principles. Mehrunes Dagon does not choose to be destructive. Destruction is what he is. Azura does not decide to govern the transitions of dawn and dusk. They are inseparable aspects of her being. This immutability is perhaps the most profound difference between Daedra and mortals, where mortal beings can change, grow, and transform themselves through choice and experience. The Daedra are eternal and fixed in their fundamental nature. They may learn, scheme, and adapt their methods, but they cannot transcend the conceptual boundaries that define them. The relationship between the mortal plane and Oblivion is complex and fraught with tension. The Aedra, diminished by their contribution to Mundus, established metaphysical safeguards to protect their creation from unrestricted Daedric influence. The most notable of these was the covenant between Alessia and Akatosh, which maintained the barriers between worlds, the same barriers that temporarily failed during the Oblivion crisis, allowing Mehrunes Dagon's invasion. Yet, despite these protections, the Daedra have always found ways to exert influence upon the mortal plane. They speak to mortals in dreams, empower champions with artifacts of tremendous power, and establish cults dedicated to their worship. Some, like Azura, take particular interest in the affairs of specific mortal populations, such as the Dunmer of Morrowind. Others, like Hermaeus Mora, collect knowledge from across all planes of existence, including the secrets and experiences of mortals. The stars in the night sky of Nirn, those tears in reality through which Aetherius shines, serve as reminders of the greater cosmos beyond the mortal plane. When a mage draws upon Magicka to cast a spell, they are channeling power from Aetherius itself, pulling divine energy through the barriers between worlds. The constellations that form the birth signs, the Apprentice, the Atronak, the Lady, and others, represent patterns of magical influence that shape the destinies of those born under them. Even time itself functions differently across these cosmic layers. In Mundus, time flows linearly, carrying mortals from birth to death along a fixed path. In Oblivion, time is more fluid, sometimes moving faster or slower relative to the mortal plane. And in Aetherius, Some theological traditions hold that time does not exist at all, with all moments occurring simultaneously in an eternal present. This cosmic structure, Mundus, Oblivion, and Aetherius, forms the stage upon which all events in the Elder Scrolls universe unfold. The Oblivion crisis represented a critical moment when the boundaries between these layers were breached, allowing forces from one plane to directly affect another in unprecedented ways. As we turn our attention to the specific realms of Oblivion and the princes who rule them, remember that we are discussing not distant planets or far-off lands, but entire universes, complete realities, operating according to their own internal logic, shaped by beings of immense power and incomprehensible age. The mortal mind can perceive these realms only imperfectly, filtering their alien nature through the limited perceptions available to us. And yet, through myth and legend, through the accounts of those rare individuals who have traveled to Oblivion and returned, and through the manifestations of Daedric influence in our world, we can begin to comprehend the infinite variety of realms that exist beyond the boundaries of Mehrunes in the endless void of Oblivion. Chapter 2. The Nature of Oblivion. Oblivion is not merely a place, but a state of existence, a vast expanse of pure potential, bounded only by the will of those powerful enough to shape it. Unlike Mundus, which operates according to consistent natural laws, Oblivion is fundamentally malleable, responsive to the desires and nature of the beings who claim portions of it as their own. The raw material of Oblivion is a substance known as creature, chaotic, unformed matter energy that serves as the foundation for all Daedric creation. In its natural state, creature manifests as a formless, luminous substance that flows like liquid light throughout the void. The Daedric Princes and other powerful entities draw upon this primordial material to construct their realms, their servants, and the various objects and creatures that populate the planes of Oblivion. This process of creation differs fundamentally from the construction of Mundus, where the Aedra sacrifice portions of themselves to establish the mortal plane, diminishing their power in the process. Daedric creation involves no such sacrifice. A Daedric prince shapes creation through pure will, imposing order upon chaos without surrendering any of their essential nature. This is why Daedric princes remain undiminished in power, despite creating vast realms and countless servants. They craft their domains from external material rather than their own substance. The planes of Oblivion vary enormously in size, stability, and complexity. The realms of the Daedric Princes are among the largest and most stable, maintained by the consistent will of their immensely powerful rulers. Lesser planes may be maintained by minor Daedra or other entities, while some are merely temporary bubbles of reality that form and dissolve without apparent cause or purpose. Travel between Oblivion and Mundus has historically been restricted by metaphysical barriers established at the creation of the mortal plane, and reinforced by the covenant between Akatosh and the Septim bloodline. These barriers prevented large-scale incursions from Oblivion into Mehrunes, though they did not completely prohibit contact between the planes. Smaller portals, magical summoning, and dream contact remained possible, allowing limited interaction between mortals and Daedra. The nature of time in Oblivion deserves particular attention, as it differs significantly from mortal experience. Within each Daedric realm, time flows according to the will of its ruler. A day in one plane of Oblivion might correspond to a year in Mehrunes, or vice versa. Some realms experience time cyclically rather than linearly, with events repeating in endless variation. Others may feature pockets where time moves at different rates, or even areas where it stands completely still. This fluid relationship with time explains how certain individuals who entered Daedric Realms during the Third Era, such as the Champion of Cyrodiil during their journey into the Shivering Isles, could spend what seemed like months or years in Oblivion, while only days passed. It also explains how Daedric Princes can possess knowledge of events that, from a mortal perspective, have not yet occurred. They may have already experienced these futures from their position outside Mundus's linear time stream. The laws of physics within Oblivion are equally malleable. Gravity, light, sound, and even causality itself can be altered according to the preferences of a realm's ruler. In Azura's moonshadow, colors exist that have no counterpart in the mortal spectrum. In Hermeos Mora's Apocrypha, knowledge takes physical form as books and scrolls that contain experiences rather than merely describing them. In the Shivering Isles, weather patterns reflect the dual nature of Sheogorath's madness, with storms of creativity in one region and deadening calm in another. Despite this fundamental mutability, most Daedric realms maintain enough consistency for mortal visitors to perceive and navigate them, if not always comfortably. The Deadlands, for instance, consistently manifests as a hellish landscape of fire and brimstone, reflecting Mehrunes Dagon's destructive nature. While specific features might shift over time, the essential character of the realm remains recognizable. This consistency allows mortals who have visited a particular plane to provide relatively reliable accounts of its nature upon their return to Mehrunes. The inhabitants of Oblivion are as varied as the realms themselves. Most numerous are the Lesser Daedra, beings created by the Daedric Princes to serve specific functions within their domains. These range from the mindless scamps that serve as basic laborers to the highly intelligent Dremora who form the officer corps of Daedric armies. Unlike mortals, Lesser Daedra are not truly independent beings, but extensions of their creator's will, shaped from creature to fulfill particular roles. When a Lesser Daedra is killed on Mehrunes, its physical form is destroyed, but its essential nature, its animating spirit, returns to the waters of Oblivion, the seas of creation that flow throughout the void. From this formless state, the Daedra may eventually reform, either naturally over time or through the deliberate intervention of a Daedric prince. This immortality is not without cost. However, many Lesser Daedra report that the experience of discorporation is extremely painful and disorienting. Apart from Daedra, Oblivion contains numerous other entities. Some are mortals who, through various means, have been transported to Daedric realms. The most unfortunate become playthings or victims of the realm's ruler, while others may serve as favored servants or champions. Still others are beings unique to particular planes, neither Daedric nor mortal in nature, but something entirely different, creatures that could not exist under the natural laws of Mundus. The planes of Oblivion are not entirely separate from one another. Passages exist between certain realms, though these are rarely accessible to any save the Daedric Princes themselves. Political relationships also exist between the various princes, ranging from alliances to bitter enmities, often shifting over scales of time incomprehensible to mortals. During the Oblivion Crisis, for instance, none of the other Daedric princes moved to aid Mehrunes Dagon in his invasion of Mehrunes, perhaps seeing his ambitions as a threat to the complex balance of power in Oblivion, or simply preferring to observe the outcome without direct involvement. The relationship between Oblivion and Aetherius, the immortal plane that lies beyond it, remains one of the great mysteries of Tamrielic metaphysics. Some theological traditions hold that magic flows from Aetherius through Oblivion before reaching Mundus, suggesting that Daedric realms may filter or alter magical energies in transit. Others propose that Oblivion and Aetherius represent fundamental opposing forces, with Oblivion embodying absence or void, and Aetherius representing pure creative potential. For the average mortal living in Tamriel, Oblivion remains a distant concern most of the time, a theological concept rather than an immediate reality. But at certain moments, such as the Oblivion crisis, or when confronted with a Daedric artifact, the thin veil between worlds becomes suddenly terrifyingly apparent. In these instances, mortals glimpse the true vastness of the cosmos, the innumerable realms that exist alongside their own, and the powerful beings who regard none with varying degrees of interest, amusement, or hunger. As we turn our attention to the specific Daedric Princes and their realms, remember that we are discussing entities whose nature and motivations transcend simple mortal concepts of good and evil. The Daedra are forces of cosmic balance, embodiments of fundamental aspects of existence. Their actions, however benevolent or malevolent they may appear to mortal eyes, serve purposes rooted in their unchanging essential nature, purposes that often remain inscrutable to the limited understanding of mortal beings. Chapter 3. The 16 Princes. Among the countless beings that inhabit the infinite realms of Oblivion, 16 stand above all others in power and influence. These are the Daedric Princes, entities of such immense power that they have carved out entire universes within the void, shaping them according to their essential nature and ruling them as absolute sovereigns. Each prince embodies particular spheres of influence, concepts, emotions, or natural forces that define their character and limitations. Despite being commonly referred to as princes, these beings exist beyond mortal concepts of gender. Most can appear in whatever form they choose when interacting with mortals, though they typically favor particular manifestations that have become associated with their worship or legends. Some, like Azura or Nocturnal, commonly present themselves in female form, while others, like Molag Bal or Mehrunes Dagon, typically appear masculine. Still others, like Hermaeus Mora, manifest in forms that bear no resemblance to mortal beings whatsoever. Let us journey now through the 16 princes, exploring their nature, their realms, and their relationship with the mortal world. Azura, the Queen of Dawn and Dusk, governs the liminal spaces between day and night, light and darkness, certainty and mystery. Her realm, Moonshadow, is said to be a place of such overwhelming beauty that mortals who glimpse it are forever after blind to the mundane world. Azura maintains a special relationship with the Dunmer of Morrowind, guiding them after the betrayal of the Tribunal. She is known for her pride and vanity, but also for her genuine concern for her mortal followers, and her prophecies guided the Nerevarin during the fall of Dagothura, and her warnings have saved countless mortals from disaster. Among the Daedric Princes, Azura is perhaps the most consistently benevolent toward mortals, though she expects absolute loyalty and can be terribly vengeful when betrayed. Boethiah, the Prince of Plots, embodies the concepts of deceit, conspiracy, and secret murder. Yet Boethiah is not merely a patron of assassins, but a complex figure representing the necessary overthrowing of corrupt systems. For the Dunmer, Boethiah is a heroic figure who helped free them from the decadence of Aldmeri society. Boethiah's realm, Attribution's Share, is a place of constant challenge and conflict, where strength of arms and wits determines survival. The prince favors mortals who demonstrate cunning and skill, often testing them with elaborate trials before granting favor. Boethiah's teachings emphasize that true strength comes not from brute force, but from strategic thinking and the willingness to act decisively when necessary. Clavicus Vile, the Prince of Bargains, delights in making deals with mortals, pacts that inevitably contain hidden clauses or unexpected consequences, always accompanied by his loyal hound Barbas, who may in fact be a portion of the prince's own power given separate form. Clavicus Vile represents both the potential and peril of ambition. His realm, the Fields of Regret, appears as an idyllic countryside that masks the emptiness and despair felt by those who have traded away what truly matters for temporary gain. Despite his trickster nature, Clavicus Vile scrupulously keeps to the letter of his agreements, making his bargains tempting despite their hidden costs. Hermias Mora, the Gardener of Men, is the Daedric Prince of knowledge, memory, and fate. His realm, Apocrypha, is an endless library where all knowledge is stored in books with black covers, guarded by fearsome creatures called Seekers. Hermias Mora himself typically appears as a mass of shifting tentacles and eyes, or as a featureless figure wreathed in darkness. Unlike many Daedric princes who demand worship, Hermias Mora seeks only new knowledge, secrets, skills, and experiences he has not yet collected. He is patient beyond mortal comprehension, willing to wait centuries for schemes to unfold, or for particularly valuable information to fall into his grasp. Hircine, the Huntsman, is the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, representing the primal joy of pursuing prey and the balance between predator and prey. His realm, the Hunting Grounds, is an endless forest where the greatest hunt continues for eternity. Hircine is the creator and patron of werewolves, though his influence extends to all forms of hunting and primal pursuit. He values skill, strength, and fair chase, despising those who would kill without challenge or purpose. Unlike many Daedric princes, Hircine rarely schemes against mortals, preferring straightforward contests of strength and cunning. Gigalag, the Prince of Order, embodies logic, deduction, and perfect structure. His realm, now lost, was once a perfect crystalline landscape where everything existed in flawless, predictable patterns. Feared by the other Daedric princes for his growing power, Gigalag was cursed to become his opposite, transformed into Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, at the end of every era. Only during the events at the close of the Third Era was this cycle finally broken, when the champion of Cyrodiil assumed the mantle of Sheogorath, allowing Gigalag to remain in his true form. Free of his curse, Gigalag has retreated into oblivion to rebuild his realm, his current activities unknown to mortal scholars. Malakath, the Keeper of the Sworn Oath, is the patron of the ostracized and the betrayed. Once the Aedra Trinimac, Malakath was transformed when he was devoured by Bethia, emerging as something neither fully Aedra nor Daedra. His realm, the Ash Pit, is a barren, ashen wasteland that reflects the harsh existence of his primary followers, the Orsima, or Orcs. Malakath values strength, honor, and loyalty to one's word, despising weakness and treachery. Unlike most Daedric princes, who view mortals primarily as tools or playthings, Malakath demonstrates genuine concern for the welfare of his followers, particularly the Orsima, whom he protects as a father might protect his children. Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, embodies revolution, change, energy, and ambition. His realm, the Deadlands, is a nightmarish landscape of fire, lava, and blackened fortresses. As we witnessed in our previous discussion, Dagon's ambition to conquer Nirn led directly to the Oblivion Crisis, when he attempted to manifest physically in the mortal world. Despite his fearsome reputation, Dagon represents not mindless destruction, but necessary change, the breaking down of old structures to make way for new growth. His followers believe that true progress requires the complete dismantling of existing systems, regardless of the immediate cost. Meridia, the Lady of Infinite Energies, governs life and light, standing in direct opposition to undead and all who would pervert the natural order of life and death. Her realm, the colored rooms, is filled with prismatic light that mortal eyes can barely endure. Unlike most Daedric princes, Meridia began her existence as a Magna G, one of the Star Children who fled Mundus during its creation. Her fall into oblivion came later, through complex circumstances lost to most mortal histories. Meridia demonstrates particular hatred for necromancers and those who traffic with the undead, often empowering mortal champions to cleanse locations tainted by unnatural death. Molag Bal, the King of Rape, is among the most universally feared Daedric princes, embodying domination, enslavement, and violent conquest. His realm, Cold Harbor, is a twisted mockery of Nirn, where familiar landmarks appear corrupted and ruined under a sky of frozen fire. Molag Bal seeks to harvest the souls of mortals, binding them to his will and feeding on their suffering. His followers are often vampires, as he is credited with creating the first vampire by violating a devotee of Arche. Despite his horrific nature, Molag Bal represents a cosmic principle that cannot be eliminated, the drive to overpower and control that exists within many living beings. Nemira, the Lady of Decay, governs the ancient darkness, representing disgust, decay, and all things rejected by conventional society. Her realm is a place of primordial darkness, untouched by light since the dawn of creation. Nemira's followers include those who embrace what others find repulsive, from cannibals to collectors of rot and filth. Yet, Nemira also represents the necessary process of decomposition that returns all things to their component parts, allowing for renewal and rebirth. Her influence reminds mortals that beauty and disgust are subjective concepts, and that what society rejects often contains its own form of truth and power. Nocturnal, the Mistress of Shadows, governs night, darkness, and luck. Her realm, Evergloam, exists in perpetual twilight, neither fully dark nor light. As patron of thieves and those who work in shadow, Nocturnal rarely makes direct demands of her followers, instead offering subtle assistance to those who demonstrate skill and cunning. The Thieves' Guild of Saradil maintains special ties to Nocturnal, with some members serving as her nightingales, mortal agents who protect her influence on Nirn in exchange for supernatural abilities. Nocturnal's true motivations remain perhaps the most mysterious of all the Daedric princes, as befits her shadowy nature. Periite, the Taskmaster, is often considered the weakest of the Daedric princes, governing natural order, pestilence, and tasks. His realm, the Pits, is arranged in a rigid hierarchical structure, reflecting his obsession with proper order. Periite typically appears as a dragon, though this resemblance to Akatosh is superficial, where Akatosh represents the grand flow of time. Periite concerns himself with the smaller patterns of natural cycles. His influence includes diseases, which he views not as random afflictions, but as necessary checks on population and catalysts for evolution and change. Sanguine, the Lord of Revelry, embodies hedonistic joy, debauchery, and the dark urges that lurk beneath civilized behavior. His realm is not a single place, but a collection of pocket planes, each dedicated to a particular form of excess or indulgence. Sanguine delights in tempting mortals to abandon inhibition and embrace their desires, often appearing in mundane guise to lure the unsuspecting into increasingly outrageous behavior. Yet Sanguine's influence is not entirely negative. His followers understand the value of pleasure in a world often defined by struggle, and the importance of occasionally setting aside worry to embrace joy, however fleeting. Sheogorath, the mad god, governs madness in all its forms, from gentle eccentricity to violent delusion. His realm, the Shivering Isles, is divided into mania and dementia, reflecting the dual nature of his influence. As noted in our discussion of Jigalag, Sheogorath's identity underwent a fundamental transformation at the end of the Third Era, when the champion of Cyrodiil assumed the mantle of the Mad God, becoming a new Sheogorath to replace the one who returned to his original form as Jigalag. Sheogorath's madness contains both destruction and creativity, the breaking of conventional thought patterns that allows for new inspiration and perspectives impossible under the constraints of pure reason. Varamina, the weaver of dreams, rules over nightmares, psychological torment, and stolen memories. Her realm, Quagmire, constantly shifts in form, preventing visitors from ever gaining their bearings or finding peace. Varamina collects memories and dreams from mortals, storing them in her fortress of the Dreamstride for reasons known only to herself. Her influence on Nirn manifests primarily through sleep, as she sends nightmares to torment sleepers or extracts particularly valuable memories for her collection. Unlike princes who seek worship or service, Varamina appears content to harvest the unconscious experiences of mortals without necessarily demanding their conscious devotion. These 16 entities, neither good nor evil in any simple mortal sense, but cosmic forces of immense power, regard Nirn with varying degrees of interest, amusement, or hunger. Their influence on the mortal world waxes and wanes according to complex metaphysical rules, the covenant established by Akatosh, and their own inscrutable agendas. While imperial theology often categorizes the Daedric Princes as uniformly evil, in contrast to the benevolent Aedra, the truth is far more complex. Some, like Azura or Meridia, demonstrate genuine concern for mortal welfare, albeit on their own terms. Others, like Molag Bal or Varamina, seem fundamentally opposed to mortal happiness or freedom. Most exist in a complex middle ground, neither actively benevolent nor malevolent, but simply pursuing their own nature, regardless of how mortals might judge the consequences. What unites all Daedric Princes is their essential immutability. Each represents fundamental aspects of reality that cannot be eliminated, only temporarily suppressed or redirected. Destruction, creation, order, chaos, light, darkness. These forces exist in eternal balance, embodied in the 16 princes who rule the realms of Oblivion. In the coming chapters, we will explore several of these realms in greater detail, beginning with the Deadlands of Mehrunes Dagon, the hellish plane from which the Oblivion crisis emerged, threatening to consume all of Nirn in flames of Daedric conquest. Chapter 4: The Deadlands and Mehrunes Dagon. Of all the Daedric realms, none became more terrifyingly familiar to the people of Tamriel during the Third Era than the Deadlands, the fiery domain of Mehrunes Dagon, Prince of Destruction. Through the Oblivion gates that tore reality asunder, portions of this nightmarish plane spilled into Nirn, allowing mortals glimpses of a world never meant for their eyes. The Deadlands embody destruction in its purest form, not as an endpoint, but as a continuous process. Nothing in this realm remains stable for long. Mountains crumble, plains crack open to reveal seas of lava, and structures decay even as they are rebuilt. This constant cycle of destruction and renewal reflects Dagon's nature as a prince of both destruction and change, forces that, while terrifying, are necessary components of existence itself. The landscape of the Deadlands appears as a vision of primordial chaos. Vast plains of blackened, cracked stone stretch toward horizons perpetually obscured by ash and smoke. Seas and rivers of lava cut through the terrain, their patterns shifting unpredictably as new fissures open and old ones seal themselves. The sky above burns with an alien sun, sometimes crimson, sometimes black, with a corona of flame, casting an unnatural light that makes shadows move in ways that defy mortal physics. Throughout this blasted landscape rise the citadels and towers that serve as command centers for Dagon's forces. These structures, forged from black metal and volcanic stone, feature angular, aggressive architecture with spikes and blades incorporated into their very design. The towers that anchored the Oblivion gates during the crisis represented smaller versions of these structures, designed specifically to maintain the connection between realms. The atmosphere of the Deadlands is immediately hostile to mortal life. The air burns with sulfurous compounds and volcanic gases that scorch human lungs. The heat radiating from the ground itself is sufficient to ignite cloth and leather after prolonged exposure. Random geysers of flame erupt without warning, incinerating the unwary. Even the few bodies of liquid that are not molten lava are typically caustic, burning flesh on contact. Vegetation in the Deadlands is sparse and alien. What plants do exist have evolved, or been deliberately created, to thrive in conditions that would destroy normal life. Blood-red grasses, with razor-sharp edges, grow in isolated patches where the ground has cooled slightly. Herada, a sentient vine-like plant, actively hunts prey by whipping barbed tentacles around any creature that ventures too close. The Deadlands' equivalent of trees are blackened, twisted spires that occasionally tremble and shift position when not being observed. The fauna of the realm is equally nightmarish. Beyond the Dremora and lesser Daedra that make up Dagon's armies, the Deadlands host numerous predatory creatures uniquely adapted to its hellish environment. Spider-like beings, with bodies of living magma skitter across lava flows. Winged terrors with skin like cooling basalt soar through the smoke-filled skies. Burrowing horrors with dozens of chitinous legs emerge without warning from the cracked ground to drag prey into underground layers where they are slowly digested over periods of excruciating pain. At the heart of the Deadlands stands Ganona, the seat of Mehrunes Dagon's power. This vast citadel, larger than the imperial city itself, rises from the largest lava sea in the realm, its foundations extending deep into the molten core of the plain. Multiple concentric walls of increasing height surround a central spire of such enormous proportions that its peak is often obscured by the swirling ash clouds above. Within this fortress, Daygon holds court, plotting conquests and overseeing the endless preparations for war that characterize his realm. The social structure of the Deadlands revolves entirely around military hierarchy. At the top stands Daygon himself, absolute sovereign whose will cannot be questioned. Below him are his most powerful servants, the Valkynes, or High Lords, who govern major regions of the realm. Beneath them serve the Marquines, or Grand Lords, who command important strategic assets, such as major fortresses. The Kinmarchers function as battlefield commanders, leading troops in actual combat, while Kinreaves serve as their lieutenants. At the bottom of the Dremora hierarchy are the Kinvals, basic soldiers who make up the majority of Dagon's armies. This rigid structure extends beyond the Dremora to encompass all beings within the Deadlands. Lesser Daedra, Scamps, Clanfear, Exivili, and others occupy positions subordinate to even the lowest Dremora, serving as shock troops, laborers, or specialists, according to their abilities. Mortal souls unfortunate enough to find themselves in the Deadlands, whether through summoning gone wrong, Daedric pacts, or simply being in the wrong place during the Oblivion crisis, exist outside this hierarchy entirely, regarded as resources to be exploited rather than beings with any rights or value. The daily reality of the Deadlands is one of constant preparation for war. Forges operate continuously, producing weapons and armor for Dagon's endless armies. Training grounds echo with the clash of weapons and harsh commands as Dremora hone their already formidable combat skills. Magical laboratories develop new spells of destruction and conjuration. Breeding pits produce new generations of lesser Daedra to replace those lost in previous conflicts. This perpetual military readiness reflects Dagon's fundamental nature. As the Prince of Destruction and Revolution, he embodies the concept of overthrowing existing orders through violence and force. His ultimate goal is not destruction for its own sake, but the replacement of all other systems with his own. During the Oblivion crisis, this ambition manifested as an attempt to remake Mehrunes in the image of the Deadlands, to transform the mortal plane into an extension of his realm, subject to his absolute authority. The connection between the Deadlands and Mehrunes was not invented during the Oblivion crisis, merely expanded to unprecedented scale. Throughout history, various cults dedicated to Mehrunes Dagon have established smaller temporary links between the realms. The most infamous of these prior connections occurred during the invasion of the Battle Spire, an imperial magical academy located in a pocket realm between Mundus and Oblivion during the Imperial Simulacrum. This earlier invasion provided Daygon and his servants with valuable information about imperial magical defenses, knowledge that would later prove useful during the larger-scale invasion of the Oblivion crisis. Mehrunes Dagon's relationship with mortals has always been complex. Unlike some Daedric princes, who seek worship or service for its own sake, Dagon values mortals primarily as tools or resources. The mythic Dawn cult that facilitated the Oblivion crisis was unusual in the degree of autonomy granted to its mortal members, particularly its leader, Mankar Camoran. This relative freedom stemmed not from any respect for mortal agency, but from Dagon's recognition that mortals operating within Mehrunes could accomplish things his direct servants could not, due to the barriers between worlds. The artifacts associated with Mehrunes Dagon reflect his destructive nature. Chief among these is the Mysterium Xarxes, the Book of Knowledge, written by Daygon himself and gifted to Mankar Camoran. This text contains magical principles of such power and danger that merely reading it without proper preparation can drive mortals to madness or death. The Xarxes served as the foundation for Camoran's commentaries, the recruitment texts used by the mythic Dawn. More commonly encountered is the Razor of Mehrunes Dagon, an artifact that has appeared throughout Tamrielic history in different forms. This weapon, regardless of its specific manifestation, possesses the ability to sever the bond between body and soul with even the slightest cut, causing instant death beyond any magical healing. The razor represents Dagon's power to sever connections and break bonds, to destroy the established order in a single decisive stroke. The Siege of Kovach during the Oblivion Crisis provided the most direct example of what happens when the Deadlands spill into Nirn. The city was not merely conquered but transformed, with portions of its architecture taking on characteristics of Daedric construction. The ground itself changed composition, becoming more like the cracked, blackened stone of the Deadlands. Had the invasion succeeded completely, all of Tamriel would have undergone a similar transformation, becoming an extension of Dagon's realm, not just politically, but metaphysically. The defeat of Mehrunes Dagon at the Temple of the One did not destroy the prince. Such permanent destruction of a Daedric prince is likely impossible, but it did establish a new barrier between Oblivion and Mundus, one that no longer required the maintenance of the dragonfires. This barrier prevents large-scale invasions, like the Oblivion Crisis, from recurring, though smaller connections between realms remain possible through magical means. In the aftermath of his defeat, Daygon retreated to the Deadlands to recover his strength and reconsider his approach. The exact consequences for failing in such a major endeavor remain unknown to mortal scholars, though some speculate that Dagon's standing among the other Daedric princes may have diminished temporarily. The realm itself reportedly experienced increased instability for some time after the crisis, with more frequent volcanic eruptions and collapses as the prince's frustration manifested in his domain. For those unfortunate few who visited the Deadlands and returned to tell the tale, the experience left permanent psychological scars. Many reported recurring nightmares in which they found themselves back in that hellish landscape, pursued by Daedric hunters through rivers of fire. Some developed intense phobias of fire or smoke, while others manifested a hypervigilance that made normal life difficult, constantly scanning for threats that no longer existed. The most severely affected sometimes developed a condition known as gate sickness, a profound metaphysical dissonance caused by exposure to a realm operating according to fundamentally different natural laws. Despite these traumas, the accounts provided by survivors offered invaluable information about a realm that had previously been known only through second-hand tales and theological speculation. Their experiences, combined with artifacts retrieved from beyond the Oblivion Gates, allowed Imperial scholars to develop a more comprehensive understanding of both the Deadlands specifically and the nature of Oblivion more generally. The Deadlands serve as a potent reminder of the dangers that exist beyond the boundaries of Mundus, realms of incredible power and alien nature that regard the mortal world with hunger or hostility. Yet they also represent an essential cosmic principle. Destruction and change, however painful, are necessary aspects of existence. Without them, creation would stagnate, never evolving or adapting to new circumstances. The horror of the Deadlands lies not in destruction itself, but in destruction unleashed without the balancing forces of creation and preservation, a cosmological principle divorced from the complex whole of which it forms just one part. As we turn our attention to other Daedric realms, remember that each represents a similar principle, a fundamental aspect of reality embodied in its purest form, without the tempering influence of opposing forces. It is this purity, this singular focus, that makes the plains of Oblivion simultaneously fascinating and terrifying to mortal perception. Chapter 5: Realms of Knowledge and Deception. While the Deadlands represent the most direct threat Oblivion posed to Nirn during the Third Era, other Daedric realms embody equally powerful but more subtle influences on the mortal world. Among these are the domains dedicated to knowledge, secrets, and deception, planes ruled by princes who prefer manipulation to outright conquest, who collect information rather than souls, and who view mortal affairs as complex games rather than simple opportunities for destruction. Let us begin our exploration with Apocrypha, the realm of Hermaeus Mora, Daedric Prince of Knowledge, Memory, and Fate. Unlike the fiery chaos of the Deadlands, Apocrypha presents itself as a place of perfect, terrible order, an infinite library where all knowledge is stored, catalogued, and guarded with fearsome vigilance. The physical appearance of Apocrypha defies simple description, as it constantly shifts to accommodate new acquisitions while maintaining its essential nature. Endless hallways lined with bookshelves that reach beyond mortal perception connect to vast chambers where knowledge takes physical form. Black pools of viscous liquid serve as both passages between sections of the realm and repositories of knowledge too dangerous or complex to be contained in conventional books. The sky above, if such a term even applies to this enclosed realm, glows with a sickly green light that casts everything in an unnatural pallor. Every piece of written knowledge that has ever existed on Nirn has a counterpart in Apocrypha. Books thought lost to time, scrolls deliberately destroyed for containing forbidden magic, journals never meant for any eyes but their creators, all are preserved in Hermaeus Mora's collection. But Apocrypha contains more than mere copies of mortal works. Here, knowledge transcends conventional written form. Some books contain experiences rather than words, absorbing readers into illusions so perfect they cannot be distinguished from reality. Others contain concepts so alien to mortal understanding that merely glimpsing their pages causes irreparable damage to the mind. The inhabitants of Apocrypha reflect its purpose. Seekers, humanoid Daedra with tentacled faces, patrol the endless halls, searching for unauthorized visitors or knowledge attempting to escape the collection. Lurkers, massive tentacled beings, guard particularly valuable sections and emerge from the black pools to attack intruders. And throughout the realm, the presence of Hermaeus Mora himself can be felt, his attention shifting like a searchlight across his domain, focusing momentarily on anything that piques his curiosity. Hermaeus Mora seldom manifests in a consistent physical form. To mortals who have encountered him, he has appeared variously as a grotesque mass of tentacles and eyes, a featureless hooded figure, or a simple arrangement of glowing lights. His voice, described as simultaneously oily and authoritative, seems to bypass the ears entirely, resonating directly within the listener's mind. This inconsistency of appearance reflects the prince's nature. Knowledge takes many forms, and so too does its master. Unlike many Daedric princes, Hermaeus Mora rarely seeks direct worship from mortals. His interest lies not in adoration, but in acquisition, specifically, the acquisition of knowledge he does not yet possess. This makes dealing with the prince simultaneously more straightforward and more dangerous than interactions with other Daedra. Hermaeus Mora will offer knowledge in exchange for knowledge, power in exchange for secrets, but the value he places on information often differs dramatically from mortal assessment. What seems a trivial fact to a human scholar might be the missing piece in a pattern Hermaeus Mora has observed developing over millennia. The most famous artifact associated with Hermaeus Mora is the Ogma Infinium, a tome of such power that reading it fundamentally transforms the reader, granting instant mastery of skills that would normally require lifetimes to perfect. Unlike most Daedric artifacts, which appear in Nirn according to their own cycles or the whims of their creators, the Ogma Infinium manifests only when Hermaeus Mora chooses a specific mortal to receive its wisdom, typically someone who has provided the prince with particularly valuable knowledge in return. Turning from the ordered repositories of Apocrypha, we find a stark contrast in the realm of Berthia, Prince of Plots, a domain called Attribution's Share, or in some texts, Snake Mount, where Hermaeus Mora collects knowledge for its own sake. Berthia values information primarily as a tool for gaining advantage, for overthrowing established powers, and for testing the strength of individuals and systems alike. Attribution's Share manifests as a realm of constant challenge and conflict. Shifting mazes force visitors to continuously reassess their surroundings. Terrain transitions abruptly from scorching deserts to freezing mountains without warning or logical progression. Throughout the realm, arenas large and small host never-ending competitions ranging from formal duels to complex political intrigues that unfold over years or centuries. The atmosphere of Attribution's Share reflects Berthia's philosophy that truth emerges only through conflict. Nothing in this realm is given freely. All must be earned through cunning, strength, or preferably a combination of both. Even the most basic necessities, such as food and shelter, exist as prizes to be won rather than resources freely available. This creates a society in perpetual competition, where alliances form and dissolve rapidly as circumstances change, and where betrayal is not merely common, but expected as a natural test of worthiness. Berthia typically appears in a warrior's form, heavily armored and armed with weapons of impossible sharpness and weight. Unlike Hermaeus Mora, whose appearance shifts unpredictably, Berthia maintains a consistent manifestation, though the prince alternates freely between male and female presentations according to circumstance or whim. This constancy reflects Berthia's nature as a prince of direct action rather than subtle manipulation, a being who challenges openly rather than from the shadows. The relationship between Berthia and mortals centers primarily around the concept of proving oneself worthy. The prince does not seek mindless worship, but rather active emulation of the principles of cunning, strength, and decisive action. For the Dunmer of Morrowind, Berthia represents a cultural hero who helped free their ancestors from decadent Aldmeri society, teaching them the difference between earned strength and inherited privilege. This positive view contrasts sharply with imperial theology, which portrays Berthia as a dangerous instigator of violence and political instability. The artifact most commonly associated with Berthia is Goldbrand, a golden sword of extraordinary power that occasionally manifests in the hands of individuals who have impressed the prince with their cunning and combat prowess. Unlike artifacts that remain consistent in their properties, Goldbrand adapts to its wielder's needs and skills, becoming more powerful as its owner proves increasingly worthy of Berthia's patronage. Complementing both the ordered knowledge of Hermaeus Mora and the direct challenges of Berthia is the subtle web of Mephala, the web spinner, prince of secrets and manipulation. Mephala's realm, known variously as the spiral skein or the web of intrigue, physically resembles an enormous spider's web stretching across a void, with strands connecting to countless other realms, including specific locations on Nirn, where particularly significant secrets are kept or momentous betrayals have occurred. The environment within the spiral skein defies mortal comprehension in ways distinct from other Daedric realms. Rather than presenting as a landscape or structure, it exists as a complex network of relationships and connections, where physical distance means nothing compared to conceptual proximity. Two locations might appear adjacent, despite representing opposite ends of Tamriel if they share a common secret. Conversely, areas physically near each other might be impossible to travel between directly if they lack conceptual connection. This unusual structure reflects Mephala's nature as the prince of the hidden connections between apparently unrelated events and individuals, where Hermaeus Mora collects explicit knowledge and Boethiah orchestrates direct challenges. Mephala specializes in the implicit, in the truths people hide even from themselves, in the motivations that drive action without conscious awareness, and in the unexpected consequences that ripple outward from seemingly minor decisions. The inhabitants of the spiral skein include spiders of all sizes, from tiny gossamer spinners that weave patterns of incredible complexity to massive arachnid monstrosities, large enough to devour entire buildings. These are not merely animals, but emanations of Mephala's will, each responsible for monitoring and manipulating specific strands of the web. Alongside these spiders exist the souls of mortals who excelled at manipulation during life, now serving as eternal advisors and agents in Mephala's schemes. Mephala herself typically appears as a multi-armed figure combining male and female characteristics in a single form, representing the prince's domain over the duality and hidden nature of all things. When interacting with mortals, however, Mephala often adopts more conventional appearances suited to the specific manipulation at hand, appearing as a trusted friend, a potential lover, or an authority figure, according to what will most effectively achieve the desired result. The nature of Mephala's influence on Nirn differs fundamentally from more direct Daedric interventions. Where Mehrunes Dagon launched an overt invasion during the Oblivion crisis, Mephala operates through subtle manipulation, placing key individuals in positions where their decisions will create far-reaching consequences, often without their knowledge. A secret revealed at precisely the right moment, a suspicion planted in a receptive mind, a seemingly chance encounter that changes the course of a life. These are Mephala's tools, more precise, and often more effective than armies of Daedra. For the Dunmer, Mephala forms part of the trinity of Daedric Princes, alongside Azura and Boethiah, who guided their ancestors away from ordinary society and helped establish their distinct culture. In this context, Mephala represents the necessity of secrecy and hidden knowledge in maintaining social order, the understanding that some truths must remain concealed for society to function properly. This positive interpretation contrasts sharply with most other Tamrielic cultures, which view Mephala as a dangerous instigator of discord and betrayal. The artifact most commonly associated with Mephala is the ebony blade, a sword that absorbs the life essence of those betrayed by its wielder. Unlike conventional weapons that grow stronger with use, the ebony blade specifically requires betrayal to increase its power, the killing of friends, allies, or others who trust the wielder. This gruesome requirement reflects Mephala's domain over the breaking of bonds and the exploitation of trust. Together, these three realms, Apocrypha, Attribution Share, and the Spiral Skein, represent approaches to knowledge and power that contrast sharply with the direct destruction embodied by the Deadlands. They demonstrate that Oblivion's influence on Nirn extends far beyond invasion and conquest, shaping mortal affairs through the revelation or concealment of information, through the challenging of established orders, and through the manipulation of relationships and perceptions. The rulers Hermaeus Mora, Boethiah, and Mephala represent a complex balance of influences. Hermaeus Mora collects knowledge without judgment, caring only for completion of his infinite library. Boethiah challenges existing structures, forcing evolution through conflict. Mephala connects disparate elements, creating new patterns from existing materials. Each contributes to the flow of information and power throughout the cosmos in their own way, sometimes cooperating, sometimes opposing one another, as their spheres of influence overlap and interact. For mortals seeking to understand these princes and their realms, the danger lies not in obvious threats, like the fire and brimstone of the Deadlands, but in more insidious risks, the loss of self that comes from exposure to too much knowledge, the corruption that follows from embracing conflict as the only path to truth, or the dissolution of identity that results from seeing too clearly the hidden connections that bind all things. Knowledge and deception, in their purest forms, can prove as destructive to the unprepared mind as any physical danger. Yet these realms also offer unique opportunities for those prepared to navigate their dangers. Scholars have returned from Apocrypha with knowledge thought lost forever. Warriors have emerged from attributions shared with skills honed beyond mortal limits. And those who understand the lessons of the spiral skein gain insight into the complex web of cause and effect that shapes all events, allowing them to act with greater precision and impact than would otherwise be possible. As with all Daedric influences, the key lies in recognizing the partial nature of what each prince offers, understanding that knowledge without wisdom, strength without restraint, or insight without compassion represents only a fragment of a complete approach to existence. It is this partiality, this single-minded focus on one aspect of reality to the exclusion of all others, that makes Daedric influence simultaneously powerful and dangerous to mortal existence. Chapter 6: Realms of Corruption and Debauchery. If knowledge and deception represent one facet of Daedric influence on mortal affairs, then corruption and debauchery surely represent another, the realms dedicated to temptation, indulgence, and the darker impulses that lurk within even the most virtuous souls. These planes embody desires both acknowledged and denied, offering fulfillment of mortal cravings while extracting costs that may not become apparent until it is too late. Among these realms of temptation, the most infamous may be those of Sanguine, Prince of Debauchery, and Dark Indulgences. Unlike most Daedric princes, Sanguine does not maintain a single cohesive realm, but rather a collection of pocket planes, collectively called the myriad realms of revelry. Each of these minor dimensions embodies a specific aspect of hedonistic excess, indulgences ranging from the relatively innocent pleasures of intoxication to the darkest forms of sadism and degradation. Some of these pocket realms appear as endless banquet halls, where food and drink never diminish, regardless of how much is consumed. Others manifest as pleasure gardens, where every plant produces euphoric effects when touched, smelled, or tasted. Still others take the form of palatial bathhouses, where waters infused with exotic oils and essences induce states of consciousness impossible to achieve through mundane means. The most notorious realms cater to darker appetites, settings where moral and physical boundaries blur and acts normally forbidden become not merely available, but impossible to resist. The environment within each realm is meticulously crafted to intensify the specific indulgence it represents. In a realm dedicated to intoxication, for instance, the very air carries subtle intoxicants that gradually overcome even the most steadfast resistance. Colors appear more vivid, music seems to emanate from objects that should not be capable of producing sound, and time itself becomes elastic, stretching moments of pleasure into seeming eternities, while compressing periods of discomfort into barely noticeable instants. The inhabitants of Sanguine's realms include Daedra, specifically created to facilitate and enhance indulgence, beautiful attendants, anticipate visitors' desires before they become consciously aware of them. Musicians play melodies that resonate with specific emotions and memories, intensifying their impact. Servers offer food and drink perfectly calibrated to individual tastes, with each consumption increasing the desire for more rather than satisfying it. Unlike the hostile Daedra of the Deadlands, these entities appear friendly and accommodating, which makes them all the more dangerous, as their sole purpose is to draw visitors deeper into patterns of excess that become increasingly difficult to escape. Sanguine himself typically appears as a portly red-skinned humanoid with small horns and an ever-present goblet of wine. This manifestation, which resembles depictions of satyrs from Cyrodiilic mythology, represents only one of countless forms the prince adopts according to circumstance. When operating on Mehrunes, Sanguine often assumes the guise of an ordinary mortal, allowing him to directly participate in the corruption he inspires, rather than merely observing it from afar. This hands-on approach distinguishes him from many Daedric Princes, who prefer to work through intermediaries when influencing mortal affairs. The relationship between Sanguine and mortals centers around temptation and its consequences. Unlike princes who demand worship or service, Sanguine simply offers opportunities for indulgence, relying on mortals' own desires to draw them into his influence. A tavern patron who has had just one more drink, despite previous resolution, a faithful spouse who succumbs to momentary passion, a recovering addict who returns to old habits, all these represent small victories for Sanguine, moments when immediate pleasure overcomes longer-term considerations. Yet Sanguine's influence contains paradoxical depth beyond simple hedonism. In a society bound by rigid constraints and artificial limitations, the impulse toward pleasure can represent a necessary counterbalance, a reminder that joy and satisfaction form essential components of a complete life. Many artists, musicians, and poets have found inspiration through Sanguine's influence, creating works that celebrate life's pleasures while acknowledging their impermanence. The danger lies not in pleasure itself, but in its elevation above all other considerations, in the loss of balance that transforms celebration into obsession. The artifact most commonly associated with Sanguine is the Sanguine Rose, a staff that summons a random Daedra temporarily to the wielder's aid. This unpredictable effect reflects the prince's capricious nature and the element of chance inherent in pursuing pleasure without restraint. One never knows whether the outcome will prove delightful or disastrous until it is too late to change course. Where Sanguine tempts through pleasure, Clavicus Vile, Prince of Bargains and Wishes, corrupts through ambition and desire for shortcuts to success. His realm, the Fields of Regret, initially appears as an idyllic pastoral landscape, reminiscent of Mehrunes' more beautiful regions. Rolling hills covered in perfect grass stretch to distant mountains. Crystal clear streams wind through meadows filled with wild flowers. The sun remains perpetually positioned just above the horizon, casting everything in the golden light of early evening. This apparent paradise conceals the realm's true nature. Closer inspection reveals that the grass, though perfect in appearance, feels wrong beneath the feet, too uniform, too artificial. The water, despite its clarity, tastes slightly bitter. The flowers, while beautiful, produce no scent. Everything in the Fields of Regret represents an approximation of natural beauty rather than the genuine article, a perfect symbol for the hollow victories achieved through Clavicus Vile's bargains. Throughout this false paradise wander, the souls of mortals who made deals with the prince, individuals who achieved their desires through shortcuts and compromises, only to discover too late the true cost of their choices. A renowned warrior who bargained for unmatched skill, but lost the ability to take pleasure in victory. a brilliant mage who gained knowledge of forbidden spells but forgot the faces of loved ones, a merchant who acquired enormous wealth but lost the capacity to trust or be trusted by others. Each achieved exactly what they asked for, while losing something they failed to specifically protect in the arrangement. Accompanying these souls is Barbas, Clavicus Vile's hound, and according to some theories, actually a semi-independent portion of the prince's own power given physical form. Barbas serves as both servant and conscience to Clavicus Vile, often attempting to warn mortals about the dangers of dealing with his master. The hound's presence represents the complex duality of Clavicus Vile himself, a being simultaneously driven to make bargains and aware of the destruction they ultimately cause. Clavicus Vile typically appears as a jovial, horned humanoid child, or as a slick merchant in fine clothing, both forms designed to disarm caution and inspire trust. Unlike Sanguine, who may corrupt almost accidentally through the natural consequences of indulgence, Clavicus Vile corrupts with precise intention, crafting each bargain to exploit specific weaknesses or oversights in the wording of agreements. The prince values cleverness and thoroughness in negotiations, sometimes even rewarding mortals who manage to secure unusually favorable terms through careful specification of conditions and limitations. The relationship between Clavicus Vile and mortals revolves around the concept of fair exchange, perverted by unequal information. The prince never technically lies during negotiations. Indeed, he follows the exact letter of every agreement with scrupulous precision. The corruption comes through the prince's exploitation of ambiguities, his awareness of consequences invisible to mortal perspective, and his careful omission of critical information that would influence decision-making. A wish for eternal youth, granted without eternal life to enjoy it. A request for tremendous wealth fulfilled through inheritance following the deaths of loved ones. A plea for marriage to an object of desire fulfilled, but with all genuine feeling removed from the relationship. Each represents the signature style of Clavicus Vile, giving exactly what was asked for while ensuring the outcome brings misery rather than satisfaction. The most famous artifact associated with Clavicus Vile is the mask, a helmet that enhances the wearer's persuasive abilities. This artifact reflects the prince's focus on social manipulation and the power of convincing others to act against their own best interests. The same skill that allows Clavicus Vile himself to arrange bargains that appear favorable at first glance, but prove devastating in practice. Perhaps the most fundamentally corrupting of all Daedric influences comes from Molag Bal, the prince of domination and spiritual enslavement. His realm, Cold Harbor, represents the antithesis of Sanguine's pleasurable domains, or Clavicus Vile's deceptively beautiful fields of regret. Cold Harbor exists as a twisted mockery of Nirn, a nightmarish reflection where everything familiar appears corrupted and wrong. The landscape of Cold Harbor features distorted versions of Nirn's geography and architecture. The imperial city appears as a crumbling ruin beneath a sky of frozen fire. White Gold Tower rises as a blackened spire, covered in spikes and chains. Rivers run with bile, or blood, rather than water. Familiar landmarks stand warped and corrupted, their proportions subtly wrong, in ways that create deep, instinctive unease in mortal visitors. Even the laws of physics operate incorrectly. Objects fall too slowly or too quickly. Fire burns cold rather than hot, and sounds travel at inconsistent speeds, creating echoes that precede rather than follow their sources. This perversion of reality reflects Molag Bal's fundamental nature as a corrupter and dominator, where creation establishes order and beauty. Molag Bal imposes disorder and ugliness. Where natural law creates predictable patterns, Molag Bal introduces unpredictable disruptions. Where free will allows for choice and consent, Molag Bal enforces submission and violation. In every aspect, Cold Harbor represents the concept of rape applied not just to individuals, but to reality itself, the forcible imposition of will without regard for the integrity of what is dominated. The inhabitants of Cold Harbor include soul-shriven, mortal souls captured by Molag Bal and denied their rightful afterlife in the plains beyond Oblivion. These unfortunate beings exist in a state of perpetual torment, their forms gradually deteriorating into increasingly monstrous configurations, while their minds remain intact enough to comprehend their condition. Some serve as slaves, performing endless meaningless tasks for the amusement of their Daedric masters. Others become subjects for experimentation, their bodies and souls manipulated to determine the limits of suffering possible before complete dissolution occurs. Also present in Cold Harbor are vampires, or rather the original vampires, from whom all vampiric bloodlines on Nirn ultimately descend. Molag Bal created the first vampire through an act of ritual violation so profound that it transformed the victim's very nature, creating an undead being dependent on dominating others through the consumption of their life essence. This origin reflects the self-perpetuating nature of corruption in Molag Bal's influence. Those he violates become violators themselves, spreading his influence through their own actions. Molag Bal himself appears as a massive humanoid figure, combining aspects of man and bull, adorned with heavy armor, and bearing a mace of impossible weight and cruelty. His physical presence radiates such intense wrongness that mortals in his vicinity often experience nausea, nosebleeds, or even heart failure if exposed for too long without magical protection. Unlike princes who may occasionally show benevolent aspects, Molag Bal remains consistently, uncompromisingly malevolent in all his interactions with mortals and other beings. Where Sanguine corrupts through pleasure and Clavicus Vile through bargains, Molag Bal corrupts through pure trauma, breaking bodies and spirits to reshape them according to his will. The relationship between Molag Bal and mortals centers around concepts of power and submission. The prince values not worship but total surrender, the complete abnegation of will in the face of overwhelming force. Those who willingly participate in his rituals, such as the ceremony to become a pure-blooded vampire, must endure experiences designed specifically to destroy their sense of self and agency, replacing independent identity with complete subservience to Molag Bal's will. The artifact most commonly associated with Molag Bal is the Mace of Molag Bal, a weapon that drains its victim's magical energy and uses it to restore the wielder's strength. This effect perfectly symbolizes the prince's approach to corruption, not merely harming others, but actively transferring their power to the one who dominates them, creating a zero-sum dynamic where one's gain necessarily comes at another's expense. These three realms, Sanguine's myriad realms of revelry, Clavicus Vile's fields of regret, and Molag Bal's Cold Harbor, represent progressively darker forms of corruption, moving from temptation through exploitation to outright violation. Together they demonstrate the spectrum of methods through which Daedric influence can undermine mortal virtue and self-determination. Yet even these corrupting influences serve necessary functions within the complex balance of cosmic forces. Sanguine's domains remind us that pleasure and joy represent essential aspects of existence, not merely distractions from higher purposes. Clavicus Vile's bargains highlight the importance of careful consideration and personal responsibility in decision-making, and even Molag Bal's horrific realm serves as a stark illustration of what happens when domination replaces cooperation as the foundation of relationships, a warning against the pursuit of power without ethical constraints. For mortals, navigating a world where these influences constantly operate, the challenge lies in recognizing their presence without succumbing to their distortions. A night of celebration need not descend into destructive excess. Ambition need not lead to ethical compromise, and the pursuit of power need not require the domination of others. By understanding how these corrupting influences operate, mortals can better resist their pull, maintaining balance and integrity, even when tempted by the seductive promises of Daedric power. As we continue our journey through the plains of Oblivion, remember that each represents not merely a physical location, but a concept made manifest, an aspect of reality concentrated to its purest form, untempered by the moderating influence of opposing principles. It is this purity, this absence of balance, that makes Daedric Realms simultaneously fascinating and dangerous to mortal perception. Chapter 7. The Shivering Isles. Among all the realms of Oblivion, none captures the imagination quite like the Shivering Isles, the domain of Sheogorath, Daedric Prince of Madness. Unlike planes that embody relatively straightforward concepts such as destruction or knowledge, the Shivering Isles represent the tremendously complex domain of madness in all its forms, from whimsical eccentricity to violent derangement, from creative genius to terrifying delusion. The Shivering Isles exist as a roughly butterfly-shaped landmass surrounded by the churning waters of the void. This shape is no coincidence, but a deliberate manifestation of duality, the two wings representing the twin aspects of madness that define the realm. One half, mania, embodies the creative, energetic, and euphoric aspects of madness. The other, dementia, represents paranoia, melancholy, and darkness. Together, they form a complete but fundamentally divided domain that reflects the nature of its ruler. Mania presents itself in vibrant, oversaturated colors that strain mortal vision. Massive mushroom trees tower hundreds of feet into the air, their caps glowing with bioluminescent light in hues of pink, blue, and green. The very ground seems alive with constant subtle movement, and the air carries spores that induce mild hallucinations and emotional intensification in those who breathe them. Streams run with water that sparkles with impossible brilliance, and plants grow so rapidly that their movement can be observed with the naked eye. The settlements in Mania reflect this exuberant nature. Buildings feature asymmetrical, ambitious architecture, with sculptures and decorations that follow no discernible pattern, yet somehow form cohesive wholes. The inhabitants dress in bright, clashing colors and engage in activities that range from merely eccentric to completely incomprehensible to outside observers. A woman might spend decades creating an elaborate garden that spells out a message visible only from above. A man might dedicate his life to collecting only blue objects, arranging them according to a classification system that makes sense exclusively to himself. In stark contrast, dementia embodies the darker aspects of madness. Its landscape appears perpetually shrouded in mist or twilight, with twisted, thorny trees creating grotesque silhouettes against the dim sky. Colors here are muted and decaying, sickly greens, bruise-like purples, and the gray-brown of rotting vegetation. Swamps release miasmas that induce paranoia and depression, while the local fauna has evolved specifically to prey on fear and uncertainty, often waiting motionless for days until the perfect moment to strike. The architecture of dementia features sharp angles and deliberately unsettling proportions. Buildings seemed to lean at impossible angles, with windows placed to resemble watching eyes, and doorways narrow and threatening. The inhabitants dress in dark, ragged clothing, and often demonstrate behaviors rooted in paranoia or obsessive thought patterns. One resident might refuse to sleep for fear that her neighbors are plotting against her. Another might compulsively count the stones in a pathway, becoming violently distressed if interrupted before completion. Despite their stark differences, mania and dementia are not entirely separate realms, but interconnected aspects of a single domain. The border between them, known as the fringe, represents a transitional zone where elements of both sides intermingle, creating an environment that shifts unpredictably between extremes. Inhabitants of the fringe often demonstrate rapidly cycling symptoms, moving from manic creativity to paranoid withdrawal with little or no transition between states. At the center of the Shivering Isles stands New Sheoth, the capital city, divided precisely along the border between mania and dementia. The northern half, Bliss, belongs to mania, with bright colors and chaotic but jubilant activity. The southern half, Crucible, belongs to dementia, shrouded in perpetual gloom and paralyzed by fear and suspicion. Between them rises the palace of Sheogorath himself, a structure that somehow bridges both realms while belonging fully to neither. The inhabitants of the Shivering Isles include both native Daedra and the souls of mortals who, through circumstance or choice, have found themselves drawn into Sheogorath's realm. The primary Daedric species native to the Isles are the Golden Saints or Ariel, and the Dark Seducers or Mazgan, who serve as the military forces of mania and dementia respectively. These humanoid Daedra maintain a bitter rivalry that occasionally erupts into open conflict despite their shared service to Sheogorath. The mortal inhabitants represent an even more diverse population. Some arrived through deliberate action, seeking inspiration or escape from the constraints of rational thought. Others were drawn in unintentionally, perhaps through proximity to artifacts connected to Sheogorath, or by wandering into thin spots between dimensions during moments of mental vulnerability. Still others were born within the Isles, descendants of previous arrivals, who have never known any reality but the mad logic of Sheogorath's domain. Regardless of origin, all inhabitants of the Shivering Isles eventually conform to the fundamental nature of their surroundings. Those in mania become increasingly creative, energetic, and disconnected from conventional logic. Those in dementia grow progressively more suspicious, melancholy, and fixated on perceived threats. Even visitors who resist these influences find their perception altered by the realm, experiencing synesthesia, the crossing of sensory experiences such as tasting colors or hearing textures, or temporal distortion, moments stretching into apparent eternities or hours passing in what seems like seconds. Governing this realm of contradictions is Sheogorath himself, the Daedric Prince of Madness, whose nature underwent a fundamental transformation at the close of the Third Era. The being who rules the Shivering Isles today is not the same entity who created the realm, but rather the mortal champion of Cyrodiil, who assumed the mantle of madness during the events of the Shivering Isles crisis. To understand this extraordinary transition, we must examine the unique curse that defined Sheogorath's existence for millennia. Unlike other Daedric princes, who maintain consistent identities throughout eternity, Sheogorath existed in a cycle of transformation. At the end of each era, he would revert to his original form as Jigalag, the Daedric Prince of Order, whose power had grown so great that the other princes feared him. Together, they cursed Jigalag to become his opposite, to embody chaos and madness rather than perfect order. Only at the close of each era, during an event called the Grey March, could Jigalag briefly return to his true form, destroying much of the Shivering Isles before being forced back into the identity of Sheogorath once more. This cycle continued for thousands of years, until the closing days of the Third Era, when the champion of Cyrodiil, the same hero who had helped Martin Septim end the Oblivion Crisis, entered the Shivering Isles through a mysterious portal that appeared in Nibin Bay. Recognized by Sheogorath as having potential beyond ordinary mortals, the champion was recruited to help prevent the coming Grey March by serving as the prince's mortal agent throughout the realm. What followed was a series of increasingly bizarre tasks designed to prepare both the realm and the champion for an unprecedented event. As the Grey March began and Sheogorath transformed back into Jigalag, the champion absorbed the power and position of the Mad God, effectively becoming the new Sheogorath, while allowing the original to remain permanently in his true form as Jigalag after defeating him in combat. This extraordinary transition, a mortal assuming the mantle of a Daedric prince, remains unique in known history. The metaphysical implications continue to provoke debate among scholars of Daedric lore. Did the champion's mortal soul merge with the Daedric essence of madness, creating a hybrid entity? Did the mortal consciousness survive the transformation, or was it subsumed entirely by the power it attempted to control? Does the new Sheogorath retain memories of mortal existence, or have these faded beneath the weight of Daedric identity? Whatever the precise nature of the transformation, its effects on the Shivering Isles were immediately apparent. With the cycle of the Grey March broken, the realm achieved a stability previously impossible. While still divided between mania and dementia, the constant threat of complete destruction no longer loomed over the domain. Jigalag, freed from his curse, departed to re-establish his own realm elsewhere in Oblivion, while the new Sheogorath settled into the role of Mad God with approaches and perspectives subtly different from his predecessor. The most visible manifestation of Sheogorath, whether the original or his successor, is that of an elderly but robust man, dressed in fine clothing split precisely down the middle, one half in the vibrant colors of mania, the other in the dark hues of dementia. He carries a staff topped with a stylized representation of a human face, divided similarly between expressions of joy and anguish. This appearance, like the realm itself, embodies the duality of madness in its complementary extremes. Sheogorath's behavior matches this divided appearance, shifting between jovial benevolence and terrifying cruelty without warning or apparent cause. He might reward a subject with extraordinary gifts for the most trivial action, then condemn another to torture for an equally insignificant offense. These unpredictable extremes are not merely capricious, but fundamental to his nature as the embodiment of madness, a being for whom conventional logic and causality have no meaning or value. Despite this unpredictability, or perhaps because of it, Sheogorath maintains one of the most complex and active relationships with the mortal plane among all Daedric princes, where some Daedric entities focus their attention primarily on their own realms. Sheogorath takes great interest in mortal affairs, often appearing unknown to observe particularly interesting examples of madness or to introduce elements of chaos into otherwise orderly situations. This intervention rarely takes overtly destructive forms. Unlike Mehrunes Dagon's straightforward aggression, Sheogorath's influence operates more subtly, introducing elements of unpredictability that force adaptations and new perspectives. A carefully organized festival might experience sudden weather inappropriate to the season, A masterfully coordinated military campaign might find its communications inexplicably garbled in ways that lead to unexpected victory rather than defeat. An artist suffering creative blockage might receive a vision so powerful it leads to their greatest work, alongside a minor but permanent psychological quirk. The artifact most commonly associated with Shoggorath is the Wabbajack, a staff capable of transforming targets into entirely different creatures or objects at random. This unpredictable effect perfectly embodies Shoggorath's approach to reality, disrupting established patterns and forcing new configurations without regard for conventional notions of benefit or harm. Using the Wabbajack, a fearsome predator might become a harmless rabbit, or a valuable ally might transform into a sweet roll, outcomes determined not by purpose or design, but by the pure chance that lies at the heart of chaotic systems. For mortals who have visited the Shivering Isles and returned to Nirn, a rare accomplishment given the realm's tendency to trap visitors permanently, the experience leaves permanent marks on perception and cognition. Colors might seem slightly different than before, with certain hues appearing more vibrant or carrying emotional associations they previously lacked. Dream patterns typically change, becoming more vivid and bizarre, while remaining oddly meaningful in ways difficult to articulate upon waking. Many returnees report increased creative inspiration, alongside occasional intrusive thoughts or perceptual distortions that, while not debilitating, serve as permanent reminders of their journey through madness. These changes reflect the fundamental message of the Shivering Isles and of Sheogorath himself, that what we call sanity represents not a natural state, but a constructed consensus, a shared agreement about which perceptions and behaviors we collectively decide to valorize or pathologize. In the Shivering Isles, where consensus reality follows entirely different rules, behaviors considered mad on Nirn might represent perfect adaptations to local conditions. Conversely, applying Nirn's rational approaches within the Isles typically leads to frustration or danger, as the realm actively resists attempts to impose external logic upon its fundamentally illogical nature. This perspective offers a profound metaphysical challenge to conventional understanding. If reality itself can vary so dramatically between realms with different natural laws and causal relationships, then perhaps all existence represents not objective truth, but merely different arrangements of possibility, different dreams dreamed by different entities, none inherently more valid than others. For those who fully grasp this concept, the boundary between sanity and madness becomes not a wall but a door, a threshold that can be crossed in either direction, given sufficient understanding and willingness to abandon preconceptions. The Shivering Isles thus represent not merely another Daedric realm, but a philosophical statement about the nature of reality itself, a place where conventional logic fails not because it is incorrect, but because it is incomplete, incapable of encompassing the full spectrum of possible experience. In the divided landscape of mania and dementia, in the unpredictable behavior of its inhabitants, and in the dual nature of its ruler, we glimpse the limitations of rational thought, alongside the dangers and possibilities of its alternatives. As we conclude our exploration of this most fascinating of Daedric realms, consider that perhaps the greatest madness would be to believe that any single perspective, whether rooted in order or chaos, in reason or inspiration, in light or darkness, could ever capture the full complexity of existence. The butterfly wings of the Shivering Isles remind us that complementary opposites form a more complete whole than either extreme could achieve in isolation. A lesson with profound implications, not just for understanding Oblivion, but for navigating the complexities of mortal existence as well. Chapter 8: Daedric Artifacts and Mortal Interaction. While the Oblivion Crisis represented the most dramatic intersection between the Daedric and mortal realms, the influence of Oblivion on Mehrunes extends far beyond such cataclysmic events. Throughout history, the Daedric Princes have maintained connections to the mortal world through more subtle means, primarily through the creation and distribution of artifacts, the establishment of cults dedicated to their worship, and direct communication with particularly receptive or useful mortals. Of these various forms of influence, perhaps none has more immediate impact than the Daedric artifacts, physical objects of tremendous power that serve as extensions of the Daedric Prince's will within Mehrunes. Unlike conventional enchanted items crafted by mortal mages, Daedric artifacts contain portions of their creator's essential nature, making them semi-sentient in many cases and imbuing them with capabilities that transcend the normal limitations of enchantment. Each Daedric Prince typically creates one or more signature artifacts that embody their sphere of influence. These items manifest on Mehrunes according to complex cycles or specific triggers, appearing when conditions align with their creator's intentions. Some emerge predictably, becoming available at regular intervals to those who perform specific rituals or meet particular criteria. Others manifest more capriciously, appearing seemingly at random before individuals who may not even recognize their significance. Once in the mortal realm, these artifacts often display a form of agency, subtly influencing their bearers in ways that advance their creator's agenda. A weapon might encourage increasingly violent behavior. A piece of armor might enhance its wearer's capabilities while gradually reshaping their personality. Even seemingly benign items like rings or amulets might whisper thoughts directly into their owner's mind, planting ideas that would never have occurred naturally. Let us examine some of the more significant Daedric artifacts that have appeared throughout Tamriel's history, considering both their powers and the more subtle influences they exert on those who possess them. Among the most feared is Mehrunes Dagon's razor, a dagger whose deceptively simple appearance belies its terrible power. The razor possesses the ability to slay instantly, with even the slightest cut, severing the bond between body and soul through means that transcend conventional magical understanding. Beyond this obvious danger, the razor influences its wielder toward increasingly destructive behavior, encouraging the elimination of perceived obstacles through direct, violent means rather than negotiation or compromise. Those who carry the razor for extended periods typically report intrusive thoughts urging confrontation and describing in vivid detail the vulnerability of those around them to the blade's edge. Azura's star represents a different form of power, not a weapon, but a soul gem of unlimited capacity, capable of capturing and containing souls of any magnitude without being consumed in the process. While this function seems straightforward, the star's influence manifests in its bearer's growing obsession with soul magic and the collection of increasingly powerful souls. Users may begin with entirely legitimate goals, advancing magical research or creating beneficial enchantments, only to find themselves gradually prioritizing the acquisition of rare souls above all other considerations, eventually viewing everyone around them primarily as potential additions to their collection. The ebony mail of Debauchery presents as a magnificent suit of dark armor that grants its wearer heightened stealth capabilities and surrounds them with a toxic miasma that harms nearby enemies. Its subtle influence encourages paranoia and a preemptive approach to perceived threats. The wearer begins to see potential betrayal in even the most loyal companions and to strike first against imagined enemies. This mentality, focusing on cunning and decisive action aligns perfectly with Boetherius' philosophy that only the strong and vigilant deserve to survive. Perhaps the most unpredictable Daedric artifact is Sheogorath's Wabbajack, a staff that transforms its targets into entirely random creatures or objects. Beyond this obvious chaos-inducing effect, the Wabbajack influences its wielder toward increasingly erratic decision-making, encouraging them to seek novel experiences and unexpected outcomes, even when stability would better serve their goals. Many bearers report that using the Wabbajack becomes addictive, with the sheer unpredictability of its effects providing a thrill that more reliable magic cannot match, eventually leading them to apply similarly random approaches to all aspects of life. The Mace of Molag Bal exemplifies the directly corrupting nature of some Daedric artifacts. This massive, spike-covered weapon drains its victims' magical energy and transfers it to the wielder, while simultaneously trapping a portion of their soul. The psychological effect on those who wield it is equally vampiric. They develop an increasing addiction to the sensation of power drawn from others, becoming unable to satisfy their ambitions through legitimate achievement and requiring the domination or destruction of others to feel fulfilled. Sanguine's Rose, a staff that summons random Daedra temporarily to the user's aid, carries influences typical of its creator. Users find themselves increasingly drawn to risk-taking behavior, making decisions based on immediate gratification rather than long-term consequences. The unpredictable nature of the summonings adds an element of gambling to each use, creating a dependency pattern similar to other forms of addiction. Eventually, many users find themselves unable to face challenges without invoking the Rose's power, regardless of whether Daedric assistance is actually necessary or appropriate to the situation. The skeleton key of Nocturnal appears as a simple lockpick, but functions as a metaphysical skeleton key capable of opening any lock, physical, magical, or metaphorical. This extends to unlocking potential within the user, removing natural limitations on their abilities. While seemingly benevolent, this power often leads to overconfidence and the belief that all restrictions, including ethical boundaries and natural laws, are merely obstacles to be circumvented rather than necessary limitations to be respected. Nymea's Ring grants the power of cannibalism, allowing the consumer of corpses to gain strength from the act, while making the user invisible while feeding. Its influence extends to creating an increasing obsession with forbidden consumption, not merely of flesh, but of anything society deems unacceptable. Bearers often find themselves drawn to increasingly taboo behaviors, testing and transcending social boundaries in all aspects of life until they exist entirely outside conventional morality. The Grey Cowl of Nocturnal offers perfect anonymity, causing anyone who sees the wearer to forget their identity immediately. This seemingly useful power comes with the devastating cost of universal forgetting. Even the wearer's loved ones cannot connect their hooded appearance with their unmasked identity. This enforced separation often leads bearers to develop dual personalities, their real self and their cowled identity, with the anonymous persona gradually becoming more dominant due to the freedom from consequences it provides. The acquisition of these artifacts typically involves direct interaction with the Daedric Princes who created them, usually through quests or trials designed to test the worthiness of potential bearers. These interactions follow patterns specific to each prince. Mehrunes Dagon demands destruction, Azura requires loyalty, Sheogorath tests adaptability to unpredictable circumstances, and so forth. The quests serve dual purposes, identifying mortals with qualities useful to the prince's agenda, and establishing a connection that facilitates ongoing influence even after the artifact changes hands. Beyond these physical manifestations of Daedric power, The princes maintain influence on Mehrunes through cults dedicated to their worship. These organizations range from publicly acknowledged religious groups to secretive cabals operating entirely outside the law, depending on how their patron is viewed within the dominant culture. In regions where Daedric worship is illegal or strongly discouraged, such as the Empire under the Nine Divines, dedicated followers learn to conceal their practices or disguise them as more acceptable forms of spiritual expression. The Dunmer of Morrowind represent a unique case, with their culture openly venerating what they call the three good Daedra, Azura Boethia, and Mephala. This official recognition stems from these princes' roles in guiding the Dunmer's ancestors away from Aldmeri society, helping establish their distinct cultural identity. Even in Morrowind, however, worship of the other Daedric princes faces varying degrees of restriction, with cults dedicated to Mehrunes Dagon or Molag Bal operating covertly to avoid official sanction. Daedric cults typically organize around the specific nature of their patron. Followers of Mehrunes Dagon emphasize destruction of existing structures and radical transformation. Hermaeus Mora's worshippers focus on the collection and hoarding of knowledge. Sanguine's adherents create bacchanalian societies dedicated to exploring the limits of pleasure and excess. These organizational principles manifest not just in the cult's goals, but in their internal structures, rituals, recruitment methods, and daily practices. The benefits granted to cultists vary similarly. Some princes offer tangible rewards, enhanced magical abilities, material wealth, or physical transformations. Others provide more abstract advantages, secret knowledge, heightened sensory experiences, or special insight. All exact prices commensurate with these gifts, whether through explicit pacts, gradual corruption of the recipient's nature, or obligations that manifest only when the prince finally calls in the debt. Direct communication between Daedric princes and individual mortals represents the most personal form of Daedric influence on Mehrunes. These communications typically occur through dreams, visions, or possession of intermediaries, though some powerful princes can briefly manifest aspects of themselves directly under certain conditions. The content of these communications ranges from simple instructions for devoted followers to complex manipulations designed to influence mortals who may not even recognize the Daedric source of their inspiration. The frequency and clarity of such communications correlate with the strength of the barriers between Oblivion and Mundus at any given time. During periods when these barriers weaken, such as the interregnum between the death of an emperor and the lighting of the new dragon fires under the Old Covenant, Daedric communication becomes more common and direct. Following Martin Septim's sacrifice and the establishment of the new permanent barrier, such communications grew more subtle and required greater effort from both the sending prince and the receiving mortal. Particularly sensitive individuals, those with innate magical abilities, specialized training, or unusual psychological characteristics, may prove more receptive to Daedric communication than the general population. This heightened sensitivity explains why certain bloodlines or professions seem disproportionately represented among those who report direct contact with Daedric princes. The Guild of Mages, for instance, maintains strict protocols regarding potential Daedric contact, recognizing that their members' magical sensitivity creates elevated risk of unwanted influence. For the average citizen of Tamriel, direct Daedric influence remains rare, and typically requires deliberate action to establish prayer at a shrine, participation in specific rituals, or possession of artifacts connected to a particular prince. This limitation exists by design, rather than coincidence. The covenant established by Akatosh, first with Alessia, and later renewed through Martin Septim's sacrifice, specifically restricts uninvited Daedric intervention in mortal affairs. Without some form of invitation or connection, even the most powerful Daedric prince faces significant metaphysical barriers to influencing events unknown. This requirement for invitation explains many aspects of Daedric behavior, including the emphasis on cults and artifacts as vectors of influence. By creating dedicated followers or distributing objects invested with portions of their power, the princes establish footholds in the mortal realm that facilitate broader influence without directly violating the terms of the covenant. Each cultist who freely chooses to worship a prince, each bearer who willingly takes up a Daedric artifact, represents a small breach in the barriers between worlds. The nature of this influence varies tremendously between princes. Some, like Azura, generally respect the autonomy of their followers, while guiding them toward actions that align with the prince's values or agenda. Others, like Molag Bal, view mortals as tools to be used and discarded without consideration for their well-being or desires. Most exist somewhere between these extremes, treating mortals with varying degrees of respect or disdain according to their usefulness and the prince's fundamental nature. For mortals seeking to interact safely with Daedric powers, whether scholars researching forbidden knowledge, adventurers utilizing powerful artifacts, or ordinary citizens who encounter Daedric influence by accident, certain principles provide some measure of protection. Awareness represents the first and most crucial defense. Recognizing the subtle corruptions that accompany Daedric gifts allows for conscious resistance to their influence. Clarity of purpose helps maintain focus on one's original goals rather than being diverted toward the prince's agenda, and perhaps most importantly, maintaining connections to other mortals provides perspective and support that can counterbalance the isolating effects of Daedric corruption. The College of Winterhold in Skyrim, the Arcane University in Cyrodiil, and similar institutions throughout Tamriel maintain extensive resources on identifying and managing Daedric influence. Their libraries contain accounts from those who successfully utilized Daedric power without surrendering their autonomy, alongside cautionary tales of individuals who fell completely under Daedric control. These case studies reveal common patterns of corruption and effective countermeasures, forming the foundation of modern daedrology, the scholarly study of Daedric entities and their interactions with the mortal world. Yet even with these precautions, completely safe interaction with Daedric power remains impossible. The fundamental nature of the Daedric Princes as embodiments of specific cosmic principles means that their influence inevitably shapes those who contact them toward greater alignment with those principles. A mortal who utilizes Mehrunes Dagon's power will become more destructive. One who calls upon Hermaeus Mora will prioritize knowledge over ethical considerations. One who bargains with Clavicus Vile will grow more calculating and exploitative in their relationships. These changes may occur so gradually that the individual fails to notice their transformation until it has progressed beyond reversal. This inexorable influence explains why the most knowledgeable authorities on Daedric matters, from the Sijic order to the temple hierarchy, universally counsel against casual or frivolous interaction with Daedric power. The risk never lies in immediate consequences, though these can be severe enough, but in the long-term cumulative effects of exposure to forces that operate according to principles alien to mortal existence. For those who must interact with Daedric forces, whether through professional necessity or unavoidable circumstance, the wisest approach involves strict limitation of contact, clear boundaries regarding acceptable influence, and regular self-examination for signs of corruption. Many experienced Daedra handlers establish personal rituals of purification following any contact, designed to reaffirm their connection to mortal values and relationships as a counterbalance to Daedric influence. As we conclude our exploration of Daedric realms and their influence on the mortal world, remember that the relationship between Oblivion and Mehrunes represents not a simple dichotomy of good versus evil, but a complex interplay of complementary and opposing forces necessary for the functioning of the cosmos. The Daedric Princes embody principles that, while dangerous in their pure forms, contribute essential components to the balanced whole of existence. Destruction creates space for new creation. Knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, expands potential. Change prevents stagnation. Ambition drives progress. Night provides rest after day's labor. Even madness offers perspectives inaccessible to purely rational thought. It is not the principles themselves, but their expression without restraint or balance that creates harm, a truth that applies as much to mortal behavior as to Daedric influence. In navigating the subtle currents of Daedric power that flow through Mehrunes, mortals face the same challenge that defines existence itself, finding balance among competing influences, accepting necessary limitations without surrendering growth, and recognizing that wisdom lies not in perfect strength, but in perfect understanding of one's own nature and place within the greater whole. Closing. And so concludes our journey through the infinite realms of Oblivion, worlds of wonder and terror that exist alongside our own, separated by barriers, both metaphysical and perceptual. From the fiery Deadlands to the twisted libraries of Apocrypha, from the chaotic duality of the Shivering Isles to the countless minor planes yet unexplored, these realms represent the boundless potential of existence beyond mortal comprehension. As the embers of our fire fade to a gentle glow, I hope these tales have transported you to places both fascinating and fearsome, glimpses of realities where different rules apply, where concepts exist in their purest forms, unconstrained by the balanced limitations of mortal existence. In our next gathering, we will turn our attention to the guilds and factions of Cyrodiil, the complex web of organizations that provide structure to imperial society, from the scholarly Mages Guild to the shadowy Brotherhood of Assassins. Each represents a path available to those seeking purpose within the Empire, and each holds secrets and histories worth exploring in the quiet hours of night. Until then, may your dreams be peaceful, or at least interesting, and may the barriers between worlds remain strong enough to protect you, yet permeable enough to inspire wonder at what lies beyond. Rest well, travelers of Mehrunes, sleep well.